Welcome, everybody, to this episode of The Monthly Blend, a monthly video podcast brought to you by Next, powered by Shulman Rogers and CONNECTpreneur. I'm Tian Wong, founder and host of the Big Idea CONNECTpreneur community, which is a global community of over 25,000 investors, founders, business leaders, and investors from around the world. And I'm also the CEO of Opus 8, which helps companies and alternative investment managers raise money through our network of over 3,400 accredited private investors, angels, and family offices throughout the U.S. Along with my co-host, Anthony Millen, who is the founder and chair of Next, powered by Shulman Rogers, we are pleased to bring you this monthly video podcast, which covers trends, information, and interesting research and tidbits, as well as fascinating interviews with game changers and newsmakers here in the Washington, D.C., Baltimore Metroplex. Anthony and I started this podcast about a year and a half ago as a way to increase awareness of cool, innovative happenings in our region, to break down silos, and to serve as a mechanism to do our part in helping to bring the region together and to help foster innovation and entrepreneurship here. Today, we're absolutely thrilled to have a conversation with three leaders from Connected DMV, which is powering the Potomac Quantum Innovation Center. We have Sarah Bauder, who's the Vice President, Development and Workforce Initiatives, Matt Erskine, Chief Strategy and Economic Officer, and George Thomas, who's the Chief Innovation Officer, all of whom are with Connected DMV, which has done an amazing job in terms of bringing big ideas and big initiatives into our region by combining all of the constituents, governmental, private sector, public sector, educational, et cetera. And congratulations to all of you guys. And I'd love to have each of you do a brief introduction of yourselves, and then we'll turn it over to Anthony. But Sarah, why don't we start with you? Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having us. It's a pleasure to be back here again. So, my history is my career, I grew up in higher education. I have over 3 decades of education to workforce talent pipelines, really focused on marginalized populations. How do you get them good jobs through getting them certificates, skills, and degrees? And I also worked for Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So I had the advantage of sitting on that perch and actually seeing my own industry, higher ed, from a very different lens. And so now I serve as the Vice President for Education to Workforce Talent Pipelines at Connected DMV.
Terrific. How about you, Matt? Can you say a few words about yourself?
Yes, thank you, Tian and Anthony. Great to be back with you. Really appreciate the opportunity. Yeah, so my background really is mainly at the intersection of the public and private sectors with a big focus on economic development. And I've done that at the regional level here in the greater Washington region, both before Connected DMV and also at the state level in Virginia and at the federal level with U.S. Department of Commerce. And so, you could say that this region is my passion, and responsible regional growth and prosperity is my passion as well. So super excited to talk about what we have going on with Connected DMV.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. Great to have you back. And then last but not least, George, welcome.
Thank you, Tian. Thank you, Anthony. It's great to be back. Thank you both for what you do for our region to get the word out for many of the great initiatives that are happening in our region. My background, very briefly, is I'm an engineer by background and spent a good portion of my early career building physical things, and then somehow kind of moved over to doing complex programs in the not so physical things. I've spent a good chunk of my career in running complex programs, that is commercialization and leading to adoption of new disruptive technologies. I served some time at IBM. I've served some time at other kind of engineering firms doing the same role. And at Connected DMV, I serve as the Chief Innovation Officer, and I have the pleasure of working with a very small but mighty team that has expertise in various aspects of government, not-for-profit, academia, engineering, to do one thing on behalf of the region, which is to drive in equitable economic growth, which is increase the size of the pie on behalf of the region for things that takes a village. So cross-sector, cross-regional, cross-domain, we get involved or are asked to get involved. And quantum is one of those initiatives that has tremendous promise for humanity and for our region. And we're very pleased to be a participant through the Potomac Quantum Innovation Center in pulling together the inaugural Quantum World Congress in the region.
Great. Thank you so much, George. I'd like to turn things over now to my co-host, Anthony Millen, who will ask the first set of questions. Anthony is a serial entrepreneur. He is a venture capitalist with the Third Sphere family of venture capital funds, and he is also the founder and chair of Next, powered by Shulman Rogers, which is revolutionizing and disrupting the way that legal services are being provided to early stage companies. Welcome, Anthony.
Great. Thank you. And welcome, George and Matt and Sarah. It's so great to have you with us on the show today. And, Connected DMV, and as Tien mentioned, is such an incredible organization and a real force in this region in building cross-sector ecosystems to establish industry pillars for economic growth. And Tien and I have been very involved in helping in the startup and early stage side with growing the ecosystem. And we appreciate the challenges and how hard ecosystem building can be. What are the added challenges to build one from an industry that is not quite here as of yet, that has not arrived yet? We'd be really interested to hear how that is different from some of the other things you've done before.
Yeah, Anthony, I thought I'd maybe start first, just maybe a quick 5 seconds as a reminder on Connected DMV. We're the 501c3 here in the Greater Washington region, the metropolitan statistical area. And as has been said, we are by design cross-jurisdictional and cross-sector. While there are many excellent regional and other organizations here in Greater Washington and the National Capital Region, we're really the only one that creates a co-equal table for the cross-sector partners. So that's industry, government at all levels, federal, state, local, academia, which includes obviously universities, but also the community college system, nonprofits, philanthropy. And we take on big initiatives where we believe our region needs to be a leader, not just in the next 2 years, but really looking at the next 3, 5, 10 years, and are areas that no one sector can handle alone, and which is why we believe the cross-sector approach is needed, and you need the collective effort of our assets across jurisdictions and across the sectors. And so ecosystem building is what we do, and we're super excited. Specifically, what we're going to talk today is obviously quantum, and it does have its own set of challenges, but George is on top of it.
Thanks, Matt. The challenge with any industry building is, as you very correctly said, there's so many piece parts that need to come together for things to really happen. And predicting those and managing to those in a established industry is very difficult. One of the cues we always take is that old saying is, those who don't know your history are doomed to repeat it. So our kind of vision for a lot of the things that we are building out is look to the past to look to the future. So we have experience knowing what challenges there are when a new disruptive tech comes on the market. And disruptive techs from somewhat simplistic single domain like AI, which is software related, got to do with data science, to more complicated things on the engineering side like a drone. So if you take quantum, it has a mix of software, hardware, and engineering in it. So it's like, complicated by itself. So we've kind of looked at multiple other threads of what's happened over the last couple of decades with what we now look back on and saying, I wish this had been in place. One very simplistic example is in the world of AI. The biggest complaint right now is we don't have enough women in leadership. We don't have enough people of color in leadership. But what are we doing for that for anything that's coming down 20 years from now? Not just continuing to go on the same road. So in quantum, our big focus has been, let's imagine the world 5 years from now, leaving it to the scientists to figure out all the gaps and the challenges that have to be solved, leaving it to the policymakers on how we interact with partners and adversaries from a national security perspective, leave it to policymakers to figure out export controls and everything like that. Assuming that all of that is in place, what should that ecosystem look like 5 years from now? So the big things are, you need talent and workforce. In any industry, talent and workforce has got to do with a small percentage of deeply technical people who are the back engine and a large percentage of people who help support it. From the C-suite down, you don't really need to know exactly what's going on in the industry. So that's one, workforce and talent. The second aspect of what we kind of looked at is, what are you going to solve for? who is going to be the buyer? Where is the industry that's going to eventually end up buying it? The traditional 20-year pathway from lab to adoption is really, let's build a whole set of hammers and then go figure out what type of nails there are in the world. How can we kind of change that and saying, here are the 3 types of nails that you should first prioritize building hammers for from the industry side of the house. So that's been a second focus of us, is trying to draw in the industry, the buyers of the technology, into the mix from day one. And the third leg from our side of the house in building an ecosystem has been around being open-eyed about policy and ethics. When you talk about policy and ethics, again, anything that is built, you look back on it and say, oh, the lines are drawn, the battles are drawn, how do we kind of move forward with it? So from our perspective, when we have looked at quantum, we have based our kind of thinking on what has not happened before for other industries. Could we do something different this time, knowing that eventually you're going to need it? And then who are the players in those spaces and how do we get them together now before something is already built?
You talk about kind of looking historically. Do you see a great example of even around another technology or another region where somebody has done something in a way that you would follow? Or is this a real pioneering effort where you're learning mostly from mistakes that other people have made and things that other people have missed?
Not just mistakes and successes, right? So like there are successes in various industries that have gone really well, not been repeated in industries that followed it. Mm-hmm. So, what are the successes? What are the challenges? What is unique about quantum? And put the 3 together. Like successes as an example, I would point to the semiconductor industry, right? In the 1980s, the entire kind of industry got together pre-competitive to build what needs to happen. The build of semiconductors got subsidized by various governments for 30 plus years to make it actually land. And the value to society has been just immeasurable within it. So that's a huge success to be learned on how to keep an ecosystem humming along while waiting for some of the pieces to fall into place, not giving up on it. And then there are failures where like the AI winter is another fantastic example. We lost faith. The promise in the hype cycle overtook what people were looking for in a killer app. And then we went through an AI winter of investment and everything else. And now that's making a comeback. So there's positives and negatives, Anthony, to look at. And then there's stuff that's very unique in the world of quantum, which there are new mistakes to be made, is the best way to kind of put it. We don't know what we don't know yet.
One thing that would be helpful before we kind of go into talking a little bit about the Quantum World Congress is just for people who are listening, if you could just, if one of you could just give kind of a 30-second summary of quantum, just to give people context. We kind of talking about this emerging, game-changing industry, but just to give people who maybe haven't heard about it before and just kind of a quick synopsis of what it is and why you're so excited with it.
I can take an attempt, but I'll make 2 caveats. There are people who have spent 50 years of their life building to this. Niels Bohr said, if you understand quantum, you don't understand quantum. And I'm going to use big animal pictures to explain something that could not be explained by big animal pictures to something that Einstein called the spooky science. So with all of that as caveats, essentially what the promise of the world of quantum is how the world behaves at the subatomic level is not something we have known about 100 years ago. We've only known about the fact that the world at the subatomic level behaves completely differently. Simplistically, like different spin properties, different magnetic properties. And we now, over the last couple of decades, at best, have learned to interpret what that means, to create an action that makes it do something, to create a reaction that is predictable. And so we don't know what exactly is happening within it, but we are able to do A and B. And what that's kind of caused is multiple dimensions of problem solving to open up in pretty much every industry we can think about, out of the physics that happens at that level. The 4 main kind of domains of quantum that people talk about, one is computers. So because we don't have to rely on just ones and zeros anymore in the world of quantum, it's all shades between 1 and 0. You have entirely new types of computing that can be done, and you have a incrementally different speed of computing that can be done. 2 different issues coming up. And through both of those, you can solve all kinds of different problems. You can create all kinds of issues, kind of rethink how we use computers today. It's been stated that the step from an abacus to a PC is a smaller step than from a PC to a quantum computer when it happens. So that's how profound the compute world is. The other three, one is sensors. Just how we measure and observe the universe is going to be profoundly different. Think brand new MRIs, brand new gravimeters to measure, brand new CMOSs, chips to kind of see. All of that is just going to be profoundly different in the world of quantum. And it's called quantum sensing. Then arguably that is further along than even computing, depending on who you ask. The third one is called quantum materials, and this is a little bit more science fiction-y. It is again taking advantage of the properties at that subatomic level to imagine new types of materials, new types of kind of entirely new kind of Star Trek-y type things you could do with materials. And the fourth one is the one that gets a lot of press. It's categorized as quantum communications, but it's got everything to do with cryptography, the quantum internet, all the fear that we have of who's going to break it first, banking, all of the stuff around what networks happen in quantum falls under the fourth bucket. So at a very high level, and very simplistically, that's the lay of the land. So from a promise perspective, Anthony, what it does for us is completely reimagine what we can do to optimize in little ways things we're already doing, let's say in energy production, searching for fuel, all of that stuff, and in profoundly different ways to maybe come up with a completely brand new energy source. So it's both that is possible through the world of quantum. And every industry we know of could be just different when somebody cuts the breakthrough.
Great. Well, thank you. That is a lot. And it's also really exciting to think about the fact that your organization is doing all of this work to position our region and ecosystems to be a world leader in this. Sarah, I was wondering, that kind of leads into the Quantum World Congress. And just to hear a little bit about what's unique about the Quantum World Congress and kind of why it's being held now and why it's being held here.
Well, I will answer that as best I can, but that really is a question for George. I'll say, from my perspective on the Quantum World Congress is, if we think about the exponential growth in quantum, if we need to be proactive, not reactive. And if you look at the history of technology, especially around ethics, policies, regulations, and standards, we've really starting in the 1990s with the advent of the iPhone and home computers, we became reactive. And so you can see, like Mark Zuckerberg's in front of of Congress because we're reactive to unintended consequences or downstream effects. And so what we're looking at is with this, one with the Quantum World Congress is to grow awareness. Like, what is quantum? Myth bust it. Like if you ask, John Q. Public about quantum, it's, way up there in the 50,000 foot level, and it's not real to me today. So part of it is me giving use cases. How do you make it real for me today as the public? Two is to bring people together. As Matt started off with, we are just excellent at bringing all the voices to the table and having them have an equal dialogue. All those different lenses are super important. And so I would say those are the top two. And third is our location. We want to be the hub of quantum. You look at cybersecurity. We are the number one cybersecurity hub. We want to be the number one quantum hub. So, George, your thoughts?
Well said, Sarah. The only things I could possibly add to what you said is, quantum is at that kind of inflection point where the hype could supersede the reality. And part of our mission, and I do want to kind of point out one thing, Anthony, we are helping with structure the ecosystem. The true hard labor is being done in research and science and engineering, and the billions of dollars that are being invested to actually solve the hard problems. We are just here trying to make sure that there is an ecosystem ready when those seeds pop for it to land into fertile soil. So I do, want to kind of be sure that it does not come across at all that we are leading the research in any way. That is not our mission. Our mission is to help the researchers, help the scientists, help industry get better traction, accelerate, and scale. And within that context, Quantum World Congress, there's two challenges to the world of quantum today. One is, where is the hype cycle? How do we make it real? From one perspective of tamping down to make it, from an expectation perspective, real. The flip side of it is, how do you keep the momentum going for true successes? And how do you get the parts of an ecosystem to come together on a regular basis to talk? There are a lot of conferences in quantum already that are all either very, very technical. So pick a domain and a subdomain and a subdomain and you do that. or very broad from one science perspective. So like 3,000 physicists might get together to talk about quantum as one of the topics. So those are the things. We are really envisioning this as a business conference. So how do we get to those people to talk to the people who will put money into it, to talk to the people who will end up buying it, to talk to the people who will make up policies which will affect everything? And how do you do that on a regular basis within the community? And then there's another layer around it. How do we do that with international colleagues? All of those 4 or 5 topics we talked about, including ethics, mean differently whether you're in the US versus Germany versus Japan. Those concepts mean differently. So how do you get them together to start talking collaboratively across countries to kind of say, all right, this is where we're kind of sort of headed. When the breakthrough happens, how will we catch it? What will we do? If something bad happens and there are bad actors, what are we going to do to react? How do we have this conversation to keep the engine going?
And Anthony, if I could, I just add to your question, why here? We've put a stake in the ground saying that we want to be a top 5 leader as a region in quantum in the world by 2030. And if you think about the assets we have here, we have the first pure play quantum IPO in our region in INQ. We've got world leading research in quantum going on at the University of Maryland, at Howard, at George Mason, at our universities. And we've got this incredibly supportive ecosystem of other, industry and other players. And we're the nation's capital. So we do have that strong tie internationally, and which is so important, as George pointed out, to ensure that we are convening not just the region, but looking beyond nationally and globally. And of course, we're the center of the federal government. So to Sarah's point, in terms of standards and policy and regulation, critically important for our national capital region to lead on this. And this will be the first conference of its kind, and our inaugural conference, which we hope will and plan to be really going strong for the foreseeable future.
This sounds like such a significant event for the industry that will be emerging and for the region. Could you tell us a little bit about the programming that people can expect at the Quantum World Congress?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So it's a 3-day program for the first year's event. It's November 29th, November 30th, and December 1st. It's going to be based at the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center downtown in DC. The day 1, November 29th, is a pre-event day. So there's multiple boot camps that are being held on that day. Some of them deep into the world of quantum. You'd need to have prerequisites to get in. We are having classes for high school and middle school kids to kind of immerse them into the world of quantum. We are having a professional development day for teachers, primarily high school teachers and 2-year community college teachers, to kind of get into the world of quantum. We are having 2 executive education sessions. So if you're an executive at an industry company, name any life sciences, space tech, energy company, if you are a C-suite in there, somebody comes and talk to you about quantum today, you immediately think computers, point them to your CTO or CIO. What we really want that community to know is, what is the promise of quantum? What are the risks associated with playing and not playing? How do you invest? How do you tell when the 1,000 people selling quantum in handbags these days? How do you kind of tell what is real in it? So it's kind of give a first level executive education and immersion in the world of quantum. So it's a bunch of boot camps on day 1. We are also having 2 kind of side events on day 1 held in conjunction with others, with the Quantum World Congress. First is the 2022 plenary of the QEDC organization, which is the National Quantum Economic Development, the Quantum Economic Development Consortium. They are having their annual plenary in conjunction with this, and the Quantum Industry Coalition is also having their annual plenary. So that's day 1 is meetings, boot camps, teaching, learning, etc. is what's happening. Day 2 and day 3 is the main conference, if you want to think about it that way. So there's plenaries in the morning with high-level talks from the 4 sectors, senior level talk from government, an international talk, somebody representing science and somebody representing industry, having conversations. Our keynote from a government perspective is Ann Neuberger from the National Security Council. We have other very senior leaders across the other sectors speaking on day 1 and day 2 in the mornings in the plenary. And in the afternoons, they go into breakouts. There's 3 types of breakouts: 2 for market acceleration, which is events around policy, around investment, around where you are with integration, product development; 2 tracks around science and technology, which is, again, not speeches on science, but workshops held by domains to kind of figure out how to progress where they are at. There's, like I said, there's a lot of science conferences. These are intended to be more workshops. And the last track, the fifth one, is around government and security. Very much a focus on national security. There's a lot of international collaborators coming. The 14 countries are invited who are sending representation, and a few other friendly countries in the world of quantum are all coming. So collaboration, international and national, government and security is kind of like the fifth track. The one other thing that's happening is on the evening of the 30th, or the second day, there is an invite-only international dinner that is being envisioned to the very small audience at the ambassador, mission leader level and senior government US officials level. Given that they're all here, be a good opportunity for them to kind of talk and have some bilateral and multilateral discussions. So that's what we envision over the 3 days, Anthony.
Great. Thank you for sharing that. I'd now like to hand it back to Tien.
Great. Thank you, Anthony. Really interesting stuff. And I'd just like to continue along the thread, George, that you had brought up about these sort of convening all these decision makers and international players. Obviously, there's a lot of promise and a lot of money coming into quantum from all over the world. What kinds of things are you guys, Connected DMV, looking at in terms of establishing protocols, establishing potentially some standards, and to sort of make sure that collaboration is done cooperatively, if at all possible?
Yeah, the geopolitics of this is very difficult, especially in the last couple of years of the way the world is. But essentially, the quantum holds promise in what it can do. There is multi-billion-dollar investments going from private sector and governments in pretty much every major country in the world to unearth what that is. Much of it is spent on defense, national security type stuff, but a good chunk of it is spent on what is considered to be the most promising industries. Life sciences and biotech is one, financial services is another, and anything to do with logistics, production, is a third. And what that really kind of then becomes is there is a lot of fear and uncertainty and doubt on quantum cryptography. There's a whole kind of suite and world that's called post-quantum cryptography, where today there is a lot of kind of taking data of others and just storing it. You can't read it because it is protected. But the goal for the people who are collecting the data is one day quantum will unlock it, and then you can go and read everything. Because the protections we have in place today are meaningless in the world of quantum. So there's a whole sequence and an entire science now dedicated to post-quantum cryptography. How do we protect our data now, knowing that someday somebody will break it in the future, without knowing how they're going to break it or what quantum is going to be? So you can imagine kind of like the cat and mouse game that's going on in that regard. That is significantly impactful of geopolitics. The other place where geopolitics is very impacted is what do you use the technology for, the use cases themselves. You can, as with any technology, it can be used for good and bad. The use cases are very much dependent on where the money goes. So managing that is taking the entire world to kind of come together, because the fundamentals of any new technology is there's never enough people, there's never enough time to kind of do everything yourself. So you have to, by definition, collaborate. So who do you collaborate with? How do you collaborate? What are the boundaries of that? Is a lot of kind of like the geopolitics navigation, where the investment is going, where the co-investment is going. So many countries, if I just stick with our own, the US has bilateral agreements and a few multilateral agreements on quantum with many friendly countries now in place for defining the individual relationships within it. Other countries are doing the same with each other. So there is this kind of network of collaborations happening in very defined spaces of quantum, in the hope that by coming together, you can maybe go faster and do more together. And that collaboration includes investment, co-investment in stuff, co-development of stuff. So that's, it is a complicated kind of answer to a question, but reflects pretty much any such geopolitical topic that you can think about these days. Quantum is reflected exactly in that.
And Tien, maybe if I could bring it home to our region from the geopolitical to maybe what we're working on here in terms of driving collaboration, there is significant federal investment that is now available, as George has pointed out, and we are collaborating to capture more than our fair share, again, as we want to make our region a top 5 leader in this important area. And so we're collaborating with a number of partners, but principally the University of Maryland on a Type 2 proposal to the NSF engines funding opportunity, very exciting opportunity, $160 million that the NSF is going to award to the winners. We've also successfully received a grant from the U.S. Department of Commerce to fund a 5-year strategic plan to fund a quantum and healthcare innovation hub for our region, centered first, obviously, up in the sort of the biotech hub of our region up there on 270, but to encompass the entire region because the whole region has assets in that space. And again, that being a wonderful use case of quantum technology and healthcare, biotech, life sciences, whether it's personalized medicine, genomics, the massive amounts of data, new medicines, that kind of thing. Very powerful. And we've got incredible partners and very excited to get going on that with the grant from US EDA at the Department of Commerce. So, those are two examples. You could argue, I think, and this is not an exact analog, but if you look 15, 20 years ago at where solar and wind power were, it needed to be de-risked. The price per kilowatt was still way too high. And the government, US government, put in significant investment to accelerate that economy. And now look where we are today. We almost take it for granted that we've got relatively inexpensive power coming from our wind and solar assets. 5 years ago, that wasn't the case. But because of that initial investment, the private sector then was able to lead to create the opportunities that we have now in that particular sector. And there are some similarities to kind of where quantum is right now. If we can make the best use of the public investment and leverage that, as George said, with the private sector investment and other sectors, 10 years from now, we're going to look back and we're going to be pretty excited.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Matt. And obviously, none of this happens without great talent. And my next question is about developing talent and workforce. We all know it's a huge challenge. How do you guys see the build out of the quantum and quantum adjacent workforce? And how is the Quantum World Congress helping with this facet?
I'll jump in here since my career has been education and workforce talent pipelines. And I don't think you can talk about workforce without bringing education in. So I think the two are intertwined. It's interesting. So having grown up in higher ed, if you look at just quantum itself, quantum, I would say, 5-10 years ago, courses were taught off hours in the back of a physics building and nobody even knew about it. And you fast forward to today, and now the narrative is about who's the best quantum university out there. And there's this vying of competition of raising to the top. And so you look at that. I was just in a meeting yesterday. I'm writing a white paper on ethics and policies around quantum. And I was talking with these quantum physicists, and the demand, almost the urgency for new talent to be developed is growing exponentially. And so what we need to do is figure out how are we going to balance supply and demand. And one of the things that we're doing at Connected DMV and George is growing awareness in the K-12 space. Because if we don't grab them early and help them understand what type of roles they can have, what type of education that they need, what certificates, they're going to lose by the time they get out of high school and go into college, and they're not going to have that background. I would say that's one. Two, I'll throw a concern on the table. One of the concerns I have, not knowing quantum very well, I'm not a techie person, but have studied it now that I'm looking at this ethics and policy, is if you take all the layers of the onion away from quantum, you have one word left, and it's math. And so if you look at math and you start with K-12 and you start to look at, there's a potential to have an increased bifurcation of the workforce. And so, to one of George's point is we need to get more women, we need to get more minorities to really start to look at math differently, and we need to get them early on. And then I would add, we need to myth bust about quantum. Nature abhors a vacuum, and that's a good saying, especially around quantum, because there's so much ambiguity, and people think you have to have a PhD, so they immediately knock it out of their head. I can't get into quantum, and that is not true at all. And so there's going to be so many new job roles that are going to be created that if we look and start preparing now, we'll be ready for it, I think, in the future. And so that's what we're looking at Connected DMV.
Could I paraphrase the quote from The Breakfast Club? Because I think it
Yes,
here. The one character was very good at math, but he failed because he couldn't get his light and shop to work. And the other character challenged him on it. And he said, well, without math, there'd be no engineering. And the other character said, without lamps, there'd be no light. I think all that goes to say is that, to Sarah's point, there are going to be career opportunities along the skill spectrum, and it's not just going to be PhDs. This is clearly a set of career pathways we want to get right now, because, as George said, we don't want to make the mistake that we did with AI and with cyber, where we weren't proactive in terms of ensuring shared opportunities across all communities.
Yeah, and if I'm a company looking to come into a space, I'm not just hiring physicists, I need the rest of it. And it's not just new talent into it, it is re-educating a data scientist in the world of quantum, re-educating people in manufacturing into quantum sensing. There's a whole number of existing workforce that can get back into the world of quantum, higher paying jobs from one perspective. And it's not even quantum requires degrees. There's a lot of technician jobs in quantum that will come up. A lot of blue collar jobs. There'll be a lot of no collar jobs that come up at quantum. Within 6 months, you can train up to do something to assist in the world. So if the promise holds true in the next 5 years, this will be a massive industry, and there'll be all types of jobs. If you take our local unicorn, IonQ, approximately 100 people, there'll probably be about 15 with deep quantum physics, world-changing expertise. The other 85 are not. So that's what we want to try to build towards.
Got it. Well, this sounds very exciting. My last question is, how can our audience help? Are you guys looking for more volunteers, more sponsors, etc.?
Yes.
Okay.
In a nutshell,
what do you guys
yes.
need, and how can they get a hold of you guys?
So the easiest way to get a hold of us is there's a website up for Quantum World Congress. It's quantumworldcongress.com. And Potomac Quantum Innovation Center, PQuick, also has our own website, pqic.org. There's forms to fill out depending on what your interest levels are on it that all get redirected to places within the organization. From a Quantum World Congress perspective itself, there are still a few sponsorships left open that we are looking to find more skills for. We are definitely looking for more people to just get involved in the space, or register and attend. Registration is open, and this is not just for people in quantum. We are inviting everybody in our ecosystem here, industry, government, academia, students, to kind of log on, join, register, and come and spend 3 days in a group of people that are at the frontiers of a new science, and try to figure out if there's a space for you within it, even if you're just interested. And of course, volunteers are always welcome. There's more work to go around than we can shake a stick at. But yeah, for sure, in any of those capacities, you can reach to us through either of those websites.
Thank you so much, George. Sarah, Matt, any last words or thoughts before we close out?
No, I would just say, this is the inaugural conference, so register, be excited to attend. Again, as George said, you don't have to be directly engaged in the quantum industry. Find something relevant for you, especially if you care about our region and care about responsible economic growth. And, for companies, small, startup, large, medium, as George said, still excellent sponsorship opportunities to be a fundamental part of this.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I would close by just saying thank you. I think this is just a wonderful conversation to have. I think the public needs to hear what's going on, and this is a good outlet for us to talk about how we can help our economy and build social equity.
Thank you so much, Sarah, George, Matt. Very exciting what you guys are doing. I learned a lot. I can't wait to attend. I'm very excited about learning more about quantum. And with that, let me turn it over to Anthony, who has some final remarks. Anthony.
Great, thank you. I also would like to thank Sarah and Matt and George. Thank all of you for, first of all, everything that you do with Connected DMV for our ecosystem. As I said at the beginning, I think it's an incredibly important and impactful organization and mission, and we really appreciate everything that you do. And we're really excited about the role that you're taking in trying to bring quantum, which is, very clear from today's discussion, one of the most important future industries that people are working towards, and to have us in the top 5 globally as a place for becoming an epicenter for quantum-related work is something really exciting to work towards. So thank you very much for that as well. And we look forward to our next month. And thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for having us.